Okay, this is also a challenge. Can you get into flow? Can you force yourself to get into flow with some sort of distraction? Can you do that? I think it's very difficult, but let's see. It is very difficult. It is very difficult. Right now there is music. Right now there are kids around. There's music. There are people. So let's see if we can get into flow. It's going to be really hard, but you have to really tune out. You have to really tune out everything that's happening. Silence has become so important for me. Yesterday, I think something really interesting happened where I was out with I met these two friends, I met these two guys at dinner, and I was just like, hey, I have something interesting. Let's go for a mango thing. Let's go for a mango dish. And I took them to this really nice Thai restaurant. We ordered some nice mango blend. But in that restaurant, there was so much noise that I couldn't sit there and I couldn't talk over there. And that's when I was like, let's get up, let's get outside. We went outside, and outside it was much more open. There was air. It was really good. But then the music was too loud. So I was like, hey, can we turn on the music? And finally, it was beautiful. It was beautiful, and I think we talked for next 1 hour or something. But it was amazing. It was amazing. It was amazing. It's like when there's music and there's all this chatter, there's noise outside you. You cannot really talk. Everybody's like asking you constantly that, hey, can you repeat? What did you say? What did you say? I get that. People can't be calm and talk. People can't just flow in the natural way how they're flowing. They have to change something. So that's very interesting. Silence is very important. Silence is very important. More than air pollution, maybe noise pollution is something very interesting. I believe more than air pollution, noise pollution is a massive problem. Very interesting. He went on to interview thousands of people, rock climbers, chess players, dancers, surgeons, factory workers, asking what it felt like when their activity was going really well. Across wildly different pursuits, people describe the same experience, and many use the metaphor of being carried along by a current like water. That's where the name flow came from. It's also interesting, like Alex Honnold, the rock climber, we were talking about that. He also talks about flow state. Because climbing for him, that is a challenge where literally the risk is death over there, and that narrows down your focus. When the risk is death, you really narrow down your lens to what matters. You narrow down to what matters, and then you are really skilled at this, and there's a significant amount of challenge. So everything combined, it is putting you into this beautiful state. Very interesting. Rock climbers, chess players, dancers, surgeons, factory workers, asking what it felt like when their activity was going really well. Across wildly different pursuits, people describe the same experience, and many use the metaphor of being carried along by a current like water. That's where the name flow came from. A key methodological innovation was the experience sampling method, which he developed in the 70s. Participants carried pagers and beeped at random times, prompting them to record what they were doing and how they felt. This gave him real-time data on everyday experience rather than after-the-fact recollections, and it confirmed that flow occurred when challenge and skill were both high and in balance. He synthesized all this in his 1990 book Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. The Psychology of Optimal Experience, which brought the concept to a mass audience and made it a cornerstone of what later became positive psychology. Painters would become utterly engrossed in their work, ignoring hunger, fatigue, and discomfort. But once the painting was finished, they lost interest in it and moved on to the next one. The reward clearly wasn't the finished product or any external payoff, it was the act of creating itself. This contradicted dominant theories of motivation at the time that centered on external reward and drives. Noise pollution is seriously underrated as a health threat. One of the top environmental risks to health in Europe. Research links chronic noise exposure to far more than annoyance. Elevated stress hormones. Wow. As I'm reading this, the noise in my background is significantly rising. The WHO has called one of the top environmental risks to health in Europe, and research links chronic noise exposure to far more than annoyance. Elevated stress hormones, hypertension, and cardiovascular disease, sleep disruption, impaired learning in children, and even increased risk of heart attacks and strokes. Because the damage is invisible and cumulative, people tend to dismiss it as a mere nuisance, and it gets a fraction of the policy attention and funding that air quality does. I'd push the general on more than air pollution framing. The comparative evidence is pretty lopsided. Air pollution is estimated to cause around 7 million premature deaths globally each year. For a million healthy. I think the reason it's more is because maybe it's a silent killer. The WHO estimates over a million healthy life years lost annually in Western Europe alone. Urban is concentrated in urban and the infrastructure populations and is an approach that mortality scale. Your intuition might be most offensive in terms of neglect relative to harm. Air pollution at least has regulatory regimes, monitoring networks, and public awareness behind noise often has weak enforcement, outdated limits, and almost no public health messaging. So the gap between how much harm it does and how seriously we take it may indeed be large. There's also subjective dimension. In daily lived experience, noise can feel more intrusive and inescapable. A bunch of kids over here. It's concentrated in urban and infrastructure populations and doesn't approach the mortality scale. Your intuition might be most offensive in terms of neglect relative to harm. Air pollution at least has regulatory regimes, monitoring networks, and public awareness behind it. Noise often has weak enforcement, outdated limits, and almost no public health messaging. No public health messaging. So the gap between how much harm it does and how seriously we take it may indeed be larger. There's also subjective dimension in daily lived experience. Noise can feel more intrusive and inescapable. Yeah. Totally took me off where I wanted to go. So this is noise pollution. What would Nietzsche say about noise pollution in the modern world, in the modern cities? nature, not nature, but nature. Wait, what happened to whisper flow today? I think the noise is too high that it can get what we are talking about. Because usually when I would say Mihai Chiksik Mihai, it would just work. Usually when I would say Mihai Chiksik Mihai, it would just work. But I don't know why it's not working today. Also, I think my space is free, so maybe I can take over my space. Let's see. Okay, oh my god. I have my space again. I have my space. My space, my space, my space. Actually, the space that I had yesterday was much better, but this is usually where I sit. So let's get back to where we were. Space is so important. Beauty is so important. Beauty and silence. Beauty, silence. So important. Wow. Okay. Nietzsche would have despised it, and we don't even have to speculate much. We don't even have to speculate much because he was famously hypersensitive to noise in his own life. He suffered from migraines and fled cities for the quiet of Sils Maria and this bazaars, complaining bitterly in his letters about barking dogs, pianos through walls, and street clatter. He also inherited this sensibility from Schopenhauer, his early intellectual hero, who wrote a whole cranky essay on noise. Whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Wow, wow. Arguing that tolerance for noise is inversely proportional to intellectual capacity. This is something really Arthur Schopenhauer. Very cool. Very cool. Tolerance for noise is inversely proportional to intellectual capacity. Schopenhauer. Very interesting. Very interesting. Arguing the tolerance for noise is an motion to intellectual capacity. Very interesting. Schopenhauer's All Noise is basically the philosopher's hate letter to urban racket, tiny essay on giant reputation. His core idea: noise is not merely unpleasant, it is hostile to thought. Noise is hostile to thought. He believes sudden unnecessary sound breaks concentration in a way that no strong mind can simply ignore. For him, a cracking whip, hammering, barking dog, or street clatter was not background texture. Street clatter. It was an assault on the inner cathedral where thinking happens. His most famous claim is brutal. The amount of noise which anyone can bear undisturbed stands in inverse proportion to his mental capacity. The amount of noise which anyone can bear undisturbed stands in inverse proportion to his mental capacity. The amount of noise which anyone can bear undisturbed the amount of noise which anyone can bear undisturbed stands in inverse proportion to his mental capacity. Undisturbed is very interesting, which means the ideal state is zero. Meaning the more interior life you have, the more noise wounds you. The more interior life you have, the more noise wounds you. The more interior life you have, the more noise wounds you. Very Schopenhauer, half philosophy, half aristocratic grumbling. Why Nietzsche would inherit this? Nietzsche saw solitude as the furnace of self-overcoming. Why Nietzsche would inherit this? Nietzsche saw solitude as the furnace of self-overcoming. Schopenhauer saw silence as the condition for intellect. Both would view the modern city as a machine that keeps the soul from hearing itself. Schopenhauer's vibe in modern terms. Noise pollution is cognitive vandalism. Noise pollution is cognitive vandalism. It doesn't just disturb peace, it destroys continuity of attention, and continuity is where continuity of attention. Continuity of attention. Wow. That's like maybe if it's intentional, that's fine. If it's intentional, that's fine. Like if you really want to hear this music and you think that music is going to add to what you want, that's amazing. So interesting. We are right now talking about all noise. Noise pollution is cognitive vandalism. It doesn't just disturb peace, it destroys continuity of attention, and continuities where deep thought, art, philosophy, and self-knowledge are born. You'd probably look at motorcycles, construction sirens, leaf blowers, phone speakers, notifications and say civilization has become acoustically stupid. Noise pollution is cognitive vandalism. It doesn't just disturb peace, it destroys continuity of attention, and the continuities where deep thought, art, philosophy, and self-knowledge are born. This is very important. This is very important. You need a space to go deeper. You need a space where you're not being observed by other people. You need silence. You need space. You need beauty. You need art. Flow requires a lot of stuff. Flow requires a lot of stuff. Wow. 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 But beyond personal grievances, philosophy gives us richer material. In this book, Zarathustra, there's a chapter called On the Flies of the Marketplace, where Zarathustra warns that where the marketplace begins, the noise of the great actors begins too, and he urges his listener to flee into solitude, because all great things occur away from glory and the marketplace. All great things occur away from glory and the marketplace. For Nietzsche, noise wasn't just sound, it was the acoustic signature of the herd. For Nietzsche, noise wasn't just sound, noise wasn't just sound. It was the acoustic signature of the herd, the chatter of public opinion, the showmen competing for attention, the constant din that prevents anyone from hearing their own thoughts. Noise wasn't just sound, it was the acoustic signature of the herd, the chatter of public opinion, the showmen competing for attention, the constant din that prevents anyone from hearing their own thoughts. So a modern city, in his eyes, would be a kind of machine for preventing self-overcoming. So a modern city, in his eyes, would be a kind of machine for preventing self-overcoming. Notification pings, traffic, advertising. Traffic, advertising, the ambient roar. He would see it all as the perfect environment for the last man. His contemptuous figure from Zarathustra, who seeks only comfort, distraction, small pleasures, and who blinks. Comfort, distraction, and small pleasures, who blinks. And this is very interesting. This is a very interesting idea of seeking small pleasure versus seeking higher pleasures. Are you seeking small pleasure or are you seeking higher pleasure? Because everything is a pleasure, everything is a stimulation, everything is a distraction, everything is an addiction. Are you seeking the highest forms of it? The highest forms of it is not easily accessible today just because of the environment. Just because of the environment. I think I need to find a better place now, or maybe we need to start coming here early in the morning. Early morning and late nights. That's it. Machine for preventing self-overcoming. Notification pings, traffic, advertising, the ambient door. You can see it all as a perfect environment for the last man. His contemptuous figure who seeks only comfort, distraction, small pleasure, and who blinks. Constant noise keeps people reactive rather than reflective. Creation of new values. The task he cared most about requires what he would call the courage of solitude, long stretches of silence in which a person can actually become who they are. He wrote in Twilight of the Idols that all great thoughts are conceived by walking, and his walks were thought through alpine, quiet, not intersections. Alpine, quiet, not through intersections. So also interesting. Like ideally, you would want to work over there. Ideally, you would want to be in that silence, be around that be around that beauty, and you want to be working. You probably add a characteristic twist, though. The problem isn't merely that cities are loud, but that people want them loud. Noise is an aesthetic. Silence is confronting. Noise is an aesthetic. Silence is confronting. In silence, you meet yourself, your nihilism, the abyss looking back. Noise is an aesthetic. Silence is confronting. Silence, beauty, space. We've got no machine for preventing self-overcoming. Requires when you conquer your solitude. All great thoughts are conceived by walking, and his walks were through alpine quiet non-intersections. We probably add a characteristic twist, though. The problem isn't merely that cities are loud, but that people want them loud. In silence, you meet yourself, your nihilism, the abyss looking back. You'd suspect that modern people surround themselves with sound precisely to avoid that encounter. The way one keeps a television on in an empty house. The noise pollution problem from nature would ultimately be a symptom of a spiritual condition, a civilization terrified of its own inner emptiness, drowning it out on scale. You might even concede one ironic point that the unbearability of the city is useful. Maybe this is also interesting. Your body needs to be comfortable so you can really engage your mind. I don't know. Your body needs to be comfortable. The body is comfortable. So really engage your mind. The noise creation problem of nature will ultimately be a symptom of a spiritual condition. Civilization terrified of its own inner emptiness, drowning it out at scale. He might even concede one ironic point that the unbearability of the city is useful, since it drives the few who matter to him up the mountain. That the unbearability of the city is useful, since it drives the few who matter to him up the mountain. How has Kanye West designed his environment, his life, to drown out the noise? Very Schopenhauer. Noise pollution is cognitive vandalism. It doesn't just disturb peace, it destroys continuity of attention. Continuities where deep thought, art, philosophy, self-knowledge are born. We can also learn a lot from Kanye West. It seems like he was, I think every man after a point likes to really read about Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, and what he has to say, his philosophy, stuff like that. Actually, fascinating case study for this exact thread. He spent enormous money and effort in achieving silence, and his story also shows the limits of trying to architect your way out of noise. The limits of trying to architect your way out of noise. The monastery house. Stevens was hiring Belgian designer Axel, where Root to transform his Calabasas, where Root said they didn't talk about decoration, but a kind of philosophy about how we live now. We changed the house by purifying it, and we kept pushing to make it purer and purer. Rooms were sheathed in luminous off-white plaster. Furnishings kept to a bare minimum, and Kanye declared, "The proportions are the decoration." The proportions are the decoration. The result was described as a futuristic monastery. No flashy sports cars, no flat screens. He called it an antidote to visual noise. A home where nothing competes for your attention. So what matters is flow in your people. Flow in your work. And with your work, love with your people. He called it an antidote to visual noise, a home where nothing competes for your attention. It's wabi-sabi philosophy, deliberate simplicity, the rejection of all that is superfluous, applied at celebrity scale. He called it an antidote to visual noise, a home where nothing competes for your attention. It's wabi-sabi philosophy, deliberate simplicity, the rejection of all that is superfluous. The rejection of all that is superfluous. Almost Nietzschean asceticism, ironically from one of the loudest public figures in life. Then came the literal flight from the city. In 2019, he bought 2 massive Wyoming ranches, 6,000-acre Bighorn Mountain Ranch, and the nearby Monster Lake Ranch. It's what he called his Wyoming vision, an escape from LA and its spotlight to a quieter life, rooted in creativity, faith, and purpose. He described the ranch as his sanctuary, and it's where he created the Donda album. This is basically Nietzsche's move to Salzmaria with a helipad. Back to original owners, amid rumors he's facing many problems. Salzmaria ranch back to original owners. Wow. Information, blackouts. He's also repeatedly cut off the children during an earlier Wyoming retreat. He abandoned social media entirely, the source saying he's far from any noise. He's far from Hollywood and is very isolated right now. The same report noted this was his pattern. He likes to work in remote places, to be in the middle of nowhere as much as he can be. I think it seems like it's better to just Airbnb. It's better to just go for a massive Airbnb where everything is taken care of than to deal with the ownership issues. It seems like that would be a bigger problem coming for ownership and all. But maybe you don't know when you own things, you cannot. If you don't own things, maybe you cannot make a lot of changes exactly how you want. Maybe that's the case. Let's see. The extra work in remote places in the middle of nowhere as much as you like. He's done Hawaii, Mexico, Paris, Malibu. Each album cycle he builds a temporary bubble. Hawaii, Mexico, Paris, Malibu. He builds a temporary bubble, flying collaborators to him rather than going to them, so the only inputs are ones he's chosen. Flying collaborators to him. Wow. The counterpoint. Here's the twist on Nietzsche question. It sets up nicely. It didn't really work. By 2023, the Wyoming dream had faded. The counterpoint. Here's the twist. Your Nietzsche question sets up nicely. It didn't really work. By 1923, the Wyoming dream had faded. His marriage ended. Controversies cost him his major partnerships. And activity on the property ceased. He eventually sold the ranch back to its original owners after years of neglect. Nature would probably say the diagnosis was right, but the prescription failed because the loudest noise he was fighting wasn't environmental, it was internal. You can plaster every wall off-white and buy 6,000 several acres of silence, but if the chaos is in your own head, you're just giving it a quieter room to echo in. Silence, as it is called, is confronting. Physical distance from the attention economy, control your inputs during deep work. Those principles scale down to a desk and a pair of headphones. No ranch required. What are the downsides of using noise cancellation headphones? Let's see. Maybe you don't really care. Once you have a really good environment, you don't really care about, and if you have noise cancellation headphones, maybe that's not an issue. Well established to accurately debate and reduce situational awareness is the clearest. Audiologists know that negative side effects of noise cancelling headphones include reduced awareness of your surroundings. You won't hear the cyclist, the car horn, or someone calling out to you. The auditory processing debate is the most interesting and most relevant to our conversation. Overuse might be a cause of auditory processing disorder, where people have difficulty understanding speech in noisy environments, despite normal hearing thresholds. After an apparent rise in young adults being diagnosed, constantly blocking environmental sound will leave the brain less practice at filtering background noise and separating speech from it. The brain's ability to pick a voice out of a noisy room is a trained skill. If you outsource, pick a voice out of a noisy room is a trained skill. If you outsource the filtering to hardware for 5 hours a day, the worry is that the skill atrophies, especially in young, still developing auditory systems. That said, this is far from settled. Other audiologists counter that while it's an interesting theory, there's no evidence it's actually happening. They're not seeing it in clinical practice or in epidemiologic research. In one investigation that consulted 11 audiologists found all agreed there's no established evidence linking noise cancelling headphones to APD. It's much too soon to know. The anecdotes are an early warning signal, not a verdict. We all know it's true there's a cluster of small issues. Some people experience eardrum suck, a pressure-like sensation or mild headache from ANC, particularly with strong low-frequency cancellation. Minority report dizziness or fatigue with extended wear. There's also a false sense of volume safety. Lost your volume for too long can still cause noise. Reduce hearing loss or tinnitus. ANC doesn't change that. Though to be fair, it often lets people listen quieter, which is a benefit of long daily wear of sealed ear cups. Our buds can also trap moisture and irritate the ear canal. Yeah, I think it's solving an artificial problem with an artificial solution. It's solving the symptom. Ideally, what you would want to do is just make the environment better. Ideally, what you want to do is make the environment silent. But what we have started doing is we are starting to solve for the symptoms, which is causing more problems, which again we go deep into solving more symptoms. So silence, beauty, art, flow state, if we solve for that, a lot of stuff will be solved. The root cause is that people are not seeking higher pleasures. Seek the higher pleasures, not the cheaper pleasures. Pleasures. Many people are stuck in cheaper, more accessible pleasures. Let's see. Dependence. So we can only focus when you're asleep inside the bubble. You have built a fragility. Ordinary acoustic life starts to feel intolerable. The practical middle path, most audiologists suggest is moderation. Use ANC deliberately for deep work or loud transit. Keep volumes modest and spend regular time with your ears in the unfiltered world so your brain keeps doing its own noise cancellation. Spend regular time with your ears in the unfiltered world so your brain keeps doing its own noise cancellation. Very interesting. Let's see if we can actually find the original article of Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer's essay. On noise. Let's see. Oh, we have found it. We found it. It seems to be a fusion of two different chapters of the second volume of the book. Perega and Paralipomena. Immerse yourself in the highest forms of art, which is highest forms of art, which is taste. Highest forms of art, high taste art, taste art. Let's see. Let's see, I'm curious. Tolerance for noise is an inverse proportion to intellectual capacity. Very interesting, very interesting. And now we can go deeper into this one on noise. Arthur Schopenhauer. Biblioclept. Post by Biblioclept. Arthur Schopenhauer. Kant has written a treatise on the vital powers, but I should like to write a dirge on them, since their lavish use in the form of knocking, hammering, and tumbling things about has made the whole of the vital powers. But I should like to write a dirge on them, since their lavish use in the form of knocking, hammering, and tumbling things about has made the whole of my life a daily torment. Certainly there are people, nay, very many, who will smile at this. Smile at this because they are non-sensitive to noise. It is precisely these people, however, who are non-sensitive to argument, thought, poetry, or art, in short, to any kind of intellectual impression. Certainly there are people, very many, who will smile at this because they are non-sensitive to noise. It is precisely these people, however, who are non-sensitive to argument, thought, poetry, or art, in short, to any kind of intellectual impression, a fact to be assigned to the coarse quality and strong texture of their brain tissues. On the other hand, in the biographies or in other records of the personal utterances of almost all great writers, I find complaints of the pain that noise has occasioned to intellectual men. For example, in the case of Kant, Goethe, Lichtenberg, Jean-Paul, and indeed, when no mention is made of the matter, it is merely because the context did not lead up to it. I should explain the subject we are treating in this way. If a big diamond is cut up into pieces, it immediately loses its value as a whole. Or if an army is scattered or divided into small bodies, it loses all its power. In the same way, a great intellect has no more power than an ordinary one as soon as it is interrupted, disturbed, distracted, or diverted. interrupted, disturbed, distracted, or diverted for its superiority entails. Superiority entails and concentrates all its strength on one point and object. Yeah, alright. As it is interrupted, disturbed, distracted, or diverted for its superiority entails that it concentrates all its strength on one point, an object, just as a concave has no more power than an ordinary one. As it is interrupted, disturbed, distracted, or diverted for its superiority entails that it concentrates all its strength on one point, an object, just as a concave mirror concentrates all the rays of light thrown upon it. Thank you so much, Rainy. All the rays of light thrown upon it, noisy interruption prevents this concentration. This is why the most eminent intellects have always been strongly averse to any kind of disturbance, interruption, and distraction, and above everything to that violent interruption which is caused by noise. Other people do not take any particular notice of this sort of thing. The most intelligent of all the European nations has called never interrupt the 11th commandment. But noise is the most impertinent of all interruptions. For it not only interrupts our own thoughts, but disperses them. Where, however, there is nothing to interrupt, noise naturally will not be felt particularly. Sometimes trifling but incessant noise torments and disturbs me for a time, and before I become distinctly conscious of it, I feel it merely as the effort of thinking. As the effort of thinking becomes more difficult, just as I should feel a weight on my foot, then I realize what it is. But to pass from genius to species, the truly infernal cracking of whips in the narrow, resounding streets of a town must be denounced. But to pass from genius to species, the truly infernal cracking of whips in the narrow, resounding streets of a town must be denounced as the most unwarrantable and disgraceful of all noises. It deprives life of all peace and sensibility. Nothing gives me so clear a grasp of the stupidity and thoughtlessness of mankind as the tolerance of the cracking of whips. The sudden sharp crack which paralyzes the brain, destroys all meditation, and murders thought must cause pain to anyone who has anything like an idea in his head. Hence every crack must disturb 100 people applying their minds to some activity, however trivial it may be, while it disjoints and renders painful the meditations of the thinker, just like the executioner's axe when it severs the head from the body. No sound cuts so sharply into the brain as this cursed cracking of whips. One feels the prick of the whip cord in one's brain, which is affected in the same way as the mimosa pudica is by touch, and which lasts the same length of time. With all respect for the most holy doctrine of utility, I do not see why a fellow who is removing a load of sand or manure should obtain the privilege of killing in the bud the thoughts that are springing up in his heads of about 10,000 people successively. He's only half an hour on the road. Hammering, the barking of dogs, and the screaming of children are abominable, but it is only the cracking of a whip that is the true murder of thought. Its object. I actually don't know what cracking a whip means. Cracking a whip, okay. Its object is to destroy every favorable moment that one now and then may have for reflection if there were no other means of urging on an animal than by making this most disgraceful of all noises. One would forgive its existence, but it is quite the contrary. The scourged cracking of whips is not only unnecessary but even useless. The effect that it is intended to have on the horse mentally becomes quite blunted and ineffective, since the constant abuse of it has accustomed the horse to the crack. He does not quicken his pace for it. There was this very beautiful thought which Samay Rana talks about. Samay Rana talks about, he said that the government should be thankful to us that we keep you guys entertained, we keep you guys distracted. Otherwise, they will start asking questions. Otherwise, they will start asking questions. Accustom the horse to the crack, he does not quicken his pace for it. This is especially noticeable in the unceasing crack of the whip which comes from an empty vehicle, as it is being driven at its slowest rate to pick up a fare. The slightest touch with the whip would be more effective, allowing, however, that it were absolutely necessary to remind the horse of the presence of the whip by continually cracking it. A crack that made 1/100th part of the noise would be sufficient. It's well known that animals, in regard to hearing and seeing, notice the slightest indications. Mere indications. Okay, now I get it. Cracking of the whip is like how you, yeah, when you want the horse to move. Even indications that are scarcely imperceptible to ourselves. Trained dogs and canary birds furnish astonishing examples of this. Accordingly, this cracking of whips must be regarded as something purely wanton, nay, as an impudent defiance on the part of those who work with their hands. Offered to those who work with their hands, that's such infamy. AI is so beautiful. You can have this original interface where you start with, it's a beautiful Model 3 going on over here. But anyways, AI is this beautiful thing where you can start with a common thought that you had. You can go deeper, you can explore your thought, you can understand, you can interact with AI and understand that, okay, what did this person think about, what did this person think about? Tell me more people, tell me more books that talk about the same idea that I'm talking about, because obviously I'm not the only one who's talking about this. And then comes a time when it will tell you that, oh, this person actually wrote a full-on essay that you should actually look into. And that, so this is an entire journey starting from just a random idea to going deeper and deeper into that thought, to then finding other people who have talked about this stuff, to then learning about on a high level what they have talked about, to then figuring out that, okay, what is the exact essay that they wrote. So AI has become a really beautiful storage function. AI has become a really beautiful storage function for the highest quality content that you want to immerse yourself into. It's amazing. Not such infamy is endured in a town is a piece of barbarity and injustice, the more so as it could be easily removed by police notice, requiring every whipcord to have a knot at the end of it. It would do no harm to draw the proletariat's attention to the classes above him who work with their heads, for he has unbounded fear of any kind of head work. A fellow who rides through the narrow streets of a populous town with unemployed post horses or cart horses, unceasingly cracking with all his strength a whip several yards long, instantly deserves instantly deserves to dismount and receive 5 really good blows with a stick. If all the philanthropists in the world, together with all the legislators, met in order to bring forward their reasons for the total abolition of corporal punishment, I would not be persuaded to the contrary. But we can see often enough something that is even still worse. I mean, a carter walking alone and without any horses through the streets, incessantly cracking his whip. He has become so accustomed to the crack in consequence of its unwarrantable toleration. Since one looks after one's body and all its needs in a most tender fashion, is the thinking mind to be the only thing that never experiences the slightest consideration or protection, to say nothing of respect? Carters, sack bearers, messengers, and such like are the beast of burden of humanity. They should be treated absolutely with justice, fairness, forbearance, and care, but they ought not to be allowed to thwart the higher exertions of the human race by wantonly making a noise. I should like to know how many great and splendid thoughts these whips have cracked out of the world. If I had any authority, I should soon produce in the heads of these carters an inseparable nexus ideorum between cracking a whip and receiving a whipping. Let us hope that those nations with no intelligence and refined feelings will make a beginning and then by force of example induce the Germans to do the same. Meanwhile, hear what Thomas Hood says of them up the Rhine. For a musical people, they are the most noisy. For musical people, they are the most noisy I've ever met with. That they are so is not due to their being more prone to making a noise than other people, but to their insensibility, which springs from obtuseness. They are not disturbed by it in reading or thinking, because they do not think, they only smoke. To their insensibility, which springs from obtuseness, they are not disturbed by it in reading or thinking, because they do not think, they only smoke, which is the substitute for thought. The general toleration of unnecessary noise, for instance, of the clashing of doors, which is so extremely ill-mannered and vulgar, is a direct proof of the dullness and poverty of thought that one meets with everywhere. Or the clashing of doors, which is so extremely ill-mannered and vulgar, is a direct proof of the dullness and poverty of thought that one meets with everywhere. In Germany, it seems as though they would plan that no one should think for noise. Take the inane drumming that goes on as an instance. Finally, as far as the literature treated of in this chapter is concerned, I have only one work to recommend, but it is an excellent one. I mean a poetical epistle in terzo rimo by the famous painter Bronzino, entitled De Romori, a Messer Luca Martini. It describes fully and amusingly the torture to which one is put by the many kinds of noises of a small Italian town. It is written in tragic-comic style. This episode is found in the Opere Burlesque del Berni Argentino ed altri, Berni published in Utrecht, 1771. The nature of intellect is such that ideas are said to spring by abstraction from observations, so that the latter are in existence before the former. But this is really what takes place, as is the case with a man who has merely his own train your abstract thinking. This is really what takes place, as is the case with a man who has merely his own experience as his teacher and book. He knows quite well which of his observations belong to and are represented by each of his ideas. He's perfectly acquainted with both, and accordingly he treats everything correctly that comes before his notice. We might call this the natural mode of education. So the latter in existence before the former. And this is really what takes place, as is the case with a man who has merely his own experience as his teacher and book. He knows quite well which of his observations belong to and are represented by each of his ideas. He's perfectly acquainted with both, and accordingly he treats everything correctly, what comes before his notice. You might call this the natural mode of education. On the other hand, an artificial education is having one's head. The nature of intellect is such that the ideas are said to spring by abstraction from observation, so that the latter are in existence before the former. This is really what takes place, as is the case with a man who has merely his own experience as his teacher and book. He knows quite well which of his observations belong to and are represented by each of his ideas. He is perfectly acquainted with both, and accordingly he treats everything correctly. And this is really what takes place, as is the case with a man who has merely his own experience as his teacher and book. He knows quite well which of his observations belong to and are represented by each of his ideas. Okay, I have an idea right now, so we'll make it happen. This is really what takes place, as is the case with a man who has merely his own experience as his teacher and book. He knows quite well which of his observations belong to and are represented by each of his ideas. He's perfectly acquainted with both, and accordingly he treats everything correctly that comes before his notice. We might call this the natural mode of education. On the other hand, artificial education is having one's head crammed merely his own experience as his teacher and book. He knows quite well which of his observations belong to and are represented by each of his ideas. Natural mode of education. An artificial education is having one's head crammed full of ideas. artificial education is having one's head crammed full of ideas derived from hearing of this talk, from learning and reading before one has anything like an extensive knowledge of the world as it is and as one sees it. The observations which produce all these ideas are said to come later on with experience. But until then, these ideas are applied wrongly, and accordingly, both things and men are judged wrongly, seen wrongly, and treated wrongly. And so it is that education perverts the mind, and this is why, after a long spell of learning and reading, we enter the world in our youth with views that are partly simple, partly perverted. Consequently, we comport ourselves with an air of anxiety at one time and another of presumption. This is because our head is full of ideas which we are now trying to make use of, but almost always apply wrongly. This is the result of putting the cart before the horse, since we are directly opposing the natural development of our mind by obtaining ideas first and observations last. For teachers, instead of developing in a boy his faculties of discernment and judgment, and of thinking for himself, we merely strive to stuff his head full of other people's thoughts. Subsequently, all the opinions that have sprung from misapplied ideas have to be rectified by a lengthy experience. It is seldom that they are completely rectified. This is why so few men of learning have such sound common sense, as is quite common among the illiterate. This is very good, but right now I'm really feeling hungry and my stomach is hurting, so I'll go for